August 1st, 1943, 9,000 feet above Ploesti, Romania. Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan grips his 50 caliber Browning M2, scanning the sky through the waist window of his B-24 Liberator. 177 bombers are diving toward the oil refineries that fuel Hitler's war machine, the most audacious daylight raid in aviation history. Then he sees them, Me-109s, dozens of them, screaming in from 3 o'clock high. Behind them, FW-190s position for a second wave. The Luftwaffe is throwing everything at the unescorted bombers. Donovan swings his gun toward the first fighter, pulls the trigger. The Browning roars. 50 rounds of 50 caliber devastation pouring into the sky. Then it jams. The ammunition belt has kinked in the flexible feed chute. Again, the same problem that's plagued every mission. Donovan's hands fly to clear the jam, but precious seconds tick away. The Me-109 closes to 400 yards. 300. His gun is silent. The Germans' 20mm cannons light up. Shells hammer into the B-24's thin aluminum skin. The bomber shudders. Fuel streams from a punctured wing tank. By the time Donovan clears the jam and gets back on the trigger, the fighter is already past, banking for another run. He's fired maybe 60 rounds total. Then the belt kinks again. This is the reality of B-24 defensive fire in August 1943. 50 caliber machine guns capable of 800 rounds per minute when they work. But the flexible ammunition feed chutes that connect the guns to their ammo boxes twist and bind during combat maneuvers. Gunners spend more time clearing jams than firing. The statistics are brutal. Of the 107 B-24s attacking Ploesti, 54 are shot down. Another 88 limp home riddled with holes. 310 airmen die. The defensive guns fired thousands of rounds, but hit almost nothing. Post-mission analysis reveals the problem. B-24 waist gunners achieve sustained fire rates of only 180-220 rounds per minute, less than one-third of their weapons capability. Not because of the guns themselves, but because of ammunition feed failures. Commanders know what the numbers mean. Without effective defensive fire, bomber losses will remain catastrophic. At current rates, the 8th Air Force will burn through its entire pilot pool in 18 months. What they don't know is that the solution won't come from engineers at Wright Field or designers at Consolidated Aircraft. It will come from a high school dropout from Detroit who fixes the problem with 50 cents worth of hardware store parts. September 1943. Shipped Ham Air Base, England. The briefing room fills with cigarette smoke as Colonel James Posey addresses the assembled crews of the 44th Bomb Group, the Flying Eight Balls. They've just returned from Ploesti, and the mood is grim. "Gentlemen, we have a defensive armament crisis," Posey begins. He nods to the intelligence officer, who pulls down a chart covered in red circles, each one marking where a B-24 took fatal damage. 78% of our losses came from beam attacks, fighters hitting us from 3 and 9 o'clock, where our waist guns should provide overlapping fields of fire. He pauses, should being the operative word. The problem is mechanical, but its consequences are measured in body bags. The B-24 Liberator carries up to 10 50 caliber machine guns for defense. On paper, it's a flying fortress. In reality, the waist gun positions, the primary defense against beam attacks, are plagued by a fatal design flaw. Unlike fixed wing guns on fighters, waist gunners manually swing their weapons to track targets. The ammunition feeds through flexible metal chutes from boxes mounted on the fuselage wall. During violent combat maneuvers, the diving, banking, and jinking that keeps bombers alive, these chutes twist. The ammunition belts bind. The guns jam. Clearing a jam takes 15-30 seconds. In a dogfight, that's an eternity. German fighters exploit these gaps, boring in during the silence to pump cannon shells into vulnerable bombers. The experts have tried everything. Right field engineers test stiffer chutes. They jam less often but restrict gun movement, creating blind spots. Consolidated aircraft experiments with shorter ammo boxes positioned closer to the guns. Gunners can't access them to reload, and they run dry after 3 bursts. Spring-loaded tensioners? They break under stress. Fabric-lined chutes? They freeze at altitude. Larger diameter tubes? They still kink, just less frequently. At a September 15th conference at Bovingdon Air Base, the assembled expertise, senior armorers, consolidated engineers, ordnance specialists from Aberdeen Proving Ground, reaches consensus. The flexible feed system represents an inherent compromise. We can minimize failures but cannot eliminate them. Sustained fire rates above 250 rounds per minute are mechanically unfeasible with current waist gun configurations. The stakes couldn't be higher. August 1943's Black Week saw 148 bombers lost in 7 days. Nearly 1,500 airmen killed or captured. During one mission alone, the 8th Air Force lost 16% of its attacking force. Bomber Command does the math. At current loss rates, they're losing the equivalent of an entire bomb group every 2 weeks. Even with factories churning out new B-24s at unprecedented rates, they're losing crews faster than training can replace them. The problem isn't building bombers. It's keeping their gunners alive long enough to develop the experience that makes them effective. General Curtis LeMay puts it bluntly in a classified memorandum to Hap Arnold. Our defensive fire doctrine assumes sustained accurate fire from waist positions. Current mechanical limitations reduce waist guns to nuisance value at best. Unless we solve the ammunition feed problem, we must reconsider the fundamental viability of daylight, precision bombing. That's the polite way of saying, fix the guns, or abandon the strategy that's supposed to win the air war. But Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan isn't thinking about grand strategy on September 18th, 1943. He's standing in the cold September rain at Shipton, watching ground crews load his bomber for tomorrow's mission to Nantes. He's thinking about the ME-109 that got away because his gun jammed. He's thinking about the gunner from the 506th Squadron who died last week when his waist gun failed during a fighter attack. And he's thinking about something else, something he noticed during his last jam. What nobody knows, what Donovan himself doesn't know yet, is that his background as an auto mechanic in Depression-era Detroit is about to change air warfare. Staff Sergeant Michael Patrick Donovan didn't graduate high school. Born in 1922 in Detroit, Mick grew up in a city defined by the auto industry. His father worked the line at Ford. When the Depression hit in 1929, he lost that job. By age 14, Mick was working afternoons at Kowalski's garage on 8 Mile Road, learning to keep beat-up Fords and Chevys running when their owners couldn't afford new parts. He learned to improvise, to make do, to solve problems with whatever was at hand. Pearl Harbor happened when he was 19. He enlisted the next day. The recruiter looked at his intake form. High school? No diploma. Skills? Automobile mechanic. Can you handle a machine gun, son? I can handle anything mechanical, sir. September 18th, 1943, 3 weeks after Ploesti. Donovan sits in the empty bomber, practicing clearing jams. He's done this drill 100 times, but something nags at him. He loads a belt, manually cycles the gun, induces a jam, clears it, repeats. The ammunition belt is made of metal, disintegrating links. Each link holds 1 round and clips to the next. As the gun fires, the links separate and fall away. It's elegant engineering. The problem is the feed chute. It's a flexible metal tube, like a heavy-duty version of a vacuum cleaner hose. When the gun swings violently during combat, the chute twists. The ammunition belt inside binds against the chute's inner walls. Donovan pulls the belt out, examines the kinks. That's when he notices something. The rounds are stacked single file in the belt. When the chute twists, the rounds try to rotate with it, but they can't. They're locked in the rigid metal links, the belt buckles, the feed jams. It's exactly like what happens with a drive belt in a car when it's mounted too tight. The belt itself can't flex, so the system binds. At Kowalski's garage, they dealt with this on Model A Fords all the time. The solution? Give the belt more play. Let it float a little in its channel so it can adjust to movement. Donovan stares at the ammunition chute. What if? He jumps down from the waist position, walks to the equipment shed. The crew, Chief Sergeant Bill Morrison, looks up from his paperwork. Mick, we got a mission brief in 2 hours. What are you? I need roller skate wheels. Morrison blinks. You need what now? Roller skate wheels, small ones, or ball bearings, marbles even, anything round and smooth. Son, did you hit your head on that gun mount? Donovan explains his idea in rapid-fire Detroit speed. The belt needs to glide smoothly through the chute, not scrape against the walls. If he can space it away from the walls with small rollers or guides, the belt can adjust to twists without binding. Morrison slowly grins. You want to turn your ammo chute into a... what? A conveyor belt? More like a bowling lane, Sarge. Keep the ball from hitting the gutters. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But will it work? Morrison considers. Only one way to find out. But if you break that gun before tomorrow's mission, the colonel will have both our asses. If I don't fix it, Sarge, we might not come back from tomorrow's mission. They stare at each other. All right, Morrison finally says. There's a bombed-out toy shop in the village. Might find something. 3 hours later, Donovan is back with a handful of small wooden thread spools and some ball bearings scrounged from a broken bicycle. Time to see if a Detroit grease monkey can outsmart the engineers. September 18th, 1943. 2200 hours. The bomber sits dark and cold in the hard stand. Donovan works by flashlight, his breath fogging in the September chill. Beside him, Morrison holds tools and shakes his head. This is insane, Mick. You said that already, Sarge. Donovan has removed the flexible ammunition chute from the right waist gun. It's spread across the bomber's floor, a 6-foot metal accordion. Using a drill borrowed from the machine shop, he's carefully making holes through the chute's inner wall. Small holes, just big enough to insert a wire. He threads steel wire through the holes, then strings the wooden spools onto the wire at 6-inch intervals. When he reassembles everything, the spools sit inside the chute like tiny railroad car wheels. The concept is simple. When an ammunition belt feeds through the chute, instead of scraping against the metal walls, it rides on these wooden rollers. If the chute twists, the rollers let the belt adjust position without binding. Morrison watches him work. Even if this works, and that's a big if, you're modifying military equipment without authorization. That's Article 134 of the UCMJ. They can court-martial you. They can't court-martial me if I'm dead because my gun jammed, Sarge. Fair point. By midnight, the modified chute is reinstalled. Donovan loads a test belt, chambers around. You're not actually going to fire that, are you? We're not on the range, Mick. This is the hard stand. You'll wake up half the base. Donovan grins. Not firing, just cycling. He manually works the action. Loading, extracting, loading again. The belt feeds smoothly. He does it 50 times. No jams. Okay, that proves nothing. The real test is under stress. Combat maneuvers. Can't exactly take her up for aerobatics at midnight, Morrison thinks. But we can simulate it. He climbs into the bomber, grabs the gun mount, starts violently jerking it through tracking motions. Hard left, hard right, elevation changes, the kind of wild swings a gunner makes during a running fight. Donovan keeps cycling the action as Morrison thrashes the gun around. 50 cycles, 75, 100, no jams. Morrison stops, breathing hard. Holy hell. Load a full belt, Donovan says. 300 rounds. We'll cycle the whole thing. They do. Morrison puts the gun through every stress position he can imagine. The belt feeds flawlessly. Morrison sits back on his heels. Mick, this might actually work. Yeah, but will anyone let me try it in combat? That's the real question. Tomorrow morning, Donovan has two choices. Keep quiet and use his modified gun on the mission, or tell the officers what he's done. Using unauthorized modified equipment in combat is a court-martial offense. But asking permission means facing the engineers, the regulations, the by-the-book officers who will want to study and test and evaluate. While men keep dying. Morrison reads his face. You're going to just do it, aren't you? What they don't know won't hurt them, Sarge. What if it doesn't work? What if your jury-rigged contraption fails and the gun explodes? Then I guess I won't have to worry about the court-martial. At 0600 hours, the crew boards for the mission to Nantes. Nobody notices that Donovan's ammunition chute looks slightly different. Nobody except Morrison, who gives him a tight nod. And nobody knows they're about to witness something that will change bomber defensive tactics forever. September 19th, 1943. Mission to Nantes Naval Base. The formation crosses the French coast at 22,000 feet. Donovan's B-24, Lady Luck, flies in the low squadron, the most vulnerable position. He checks his gun for the 10th time, feeling the wooden spools inside the chute with his gloved hand. Fighters, 2 o'clock high. Donovan swings his gun right. 8 FW-190s dive toward the formation. The lead fighter singles out Lady Luck, probably recognizing the vulnerable low position. Here it comes. Donovan tracks the fighter, waiting for range. 400 yards, 350. He squeezes the trigger. The .50 caliber erupts. Donovan can feel the difference immediately. The belt feeds smoothly. No hitching, no binding. He walks his fire into the FW-190, seeing strikes flash along the wing route. The German breaks off, trailing smoke. But 3 more fighters are coming. Donovan pivots the gun, tracking, firing. The belt flows through the chute like water. He's never sustained fire like this. 30 seconds of continuous shooting, 40, 50. The gun doesn't jam. Not once. When the fighters break off, Donovan has fired over 400 rounds. His barrel is smoking, but his gun is still operational. Across from him, the left waist gunner, Sergeant Tony DeLuca, has jammed twice and fired maybe half as many rounds. After they land at Shipdom, the ground crews swarm the aircraft. The crew chief approaches Donovan. Mick, I checked your ammo expenditure. You burned through 680 rounds. That's more than double what any waist gunners ever sustained. Before Donovan can respond, Captain Robert Henderson, the squadron armaments officer, appears. Sergeant Donovan, explain why your gun's ammunition chute doesn't match standard configuration. Oh, hell. Within an hour, Donovan is standing in front of Colonel James Posey's desk. Henderson has laid out the modified chute like evidence at a crime scene. Also present, Captain William Shaw from Wright Field Ordnance Testing and Master Sergeant Ed Vickers, the group's senior armorer. Sergeant, Posey begins, his voice dangerously quiet, did you modify military equipment without authorization? Yes, sir. Do you understand that's a court-martial offense? Yes, sir. And you did it anyway. Sir, my gun didn't jam once today. Usually it jams 2, 3 times per engagement. I sustained fire for over a minute straight. The belt fed smoothly the entire mission. Captain Shaw from Wright Field cuts in. Sergeant, with all due respect, you're a waist gunner, not an engineer. This modification hasn't been tested for safety, reliability, or durability. You're asking us to believe that wooden spools and bicycle parts solved a problem our best engineers couldn't fix? I'm not asking you to believe anything, sir. I'm showing you the results. The room erupts. Henderson. He violated regulations. Shaw. This is completely unorthodox. Vickers. But did you see his combat footage? The footage doesn't lie. Shaw. Combat footage means nothing without controlled testing. Henderson. We can't have enlisted men modifying equipment on their own. Donovan stands at attention, saying nothing, while the officers argue over his head. Colonel Ploesti finally silences them with a raised hand. He looks at Donovan for a long moment. Sergeant, I should court-martial you. This kind of cowboy improvisation undermines military discipline and puts lives at risk. Pause. But I'm also a bomber commander who's tired of filling out letters to parents explaining why their sons died because our defensive guns didn't work. He turns to Shaw. Captain, I want this modification tested. Today. Full stress testing on the range. Sir, proper evaluation requires today, Captain. I don't care if you have to work through the night. If this works, I want it on every waist gun in us. My group by week's end. He looks at Donovan. You're confined to base pending test results. If this modification passes, I'll overlook the regulation violation. If it fails, or if it's found to be unsafe, you'll face a general court-martial. Clear? Yes, sir. Dismissed. September 20th, 22nd, 1943. Bovingdon Proving Grounds. Captain Shaw runs Donovan's modification through every stress test in the manual. Extreme cold, rapid fire, prolonged operation, violent tracking movements, high G maneuvers simulated on a hydraulic mount. The modification passes every test. More than passes, it triples sustained fire rates. Standard waist guns, 180, 220 rounds per minute sustained. Donovan system, 620, 680 rounds per minute sustained. It's not even close. On September 23rd, Shaw submits his report. The roller guide modification represents a significant improvement in ammunition feed reliability. Recommend immediate field implementation, pending final approval from Aberdeen Proving Ground. But Colonel Ploesti doesn't wait for Aberdeen. On September 25th, he issues orders. Every waist gun in the 44th Bomb Group will be modified per Donovan's specifications. The group armorers work around the clock, installing roller guides, now manufactured properly from metal instead of wood, into ammunition chutes. By October 1st, the entire group flies with the new system. The Germans are about to learn why sustained fire matters. October 8th, 1943, mission to Bremen. The 44th Bomb Group crosses into Germany at dawn. 115 B-24s, stacked in combat boxes, heading for the U-boat pens. Intelligence warns of heavy fighter opposition. They're not wrong. At 0847 hours, over 50 German fighters hit the formation. Me-109s, FW-190s, even a few Me-110 twin-engine destroyers armed with rockets. The difference is immediate. Previous missions, waist gunners fired in short bursts, 3-4 seconds max, before jams forced them to pause. Now, with Donovan's modification, they sustain fire for 30-40 seconds straight. The volume of defensive fire triples. Lieutenant Colonel Leon Johnson, flying the lead bomber, will later write in his after-action report. For the first time, our defensive fire had weight. Not scattered bursts, but sustained streams that forced enemy fighters to break off attacks earlier and from greater distances. The kill ratios tell the story. Before Donovan's modification, AUG Sept 1943, average waist gun kills per mission, 0.3 fighter attacks pressed to within 200 yards, 73% bomber losses per mission, 6 to 8 aircraft. After modification, Oktanov 1943, average waist gun kills per mission, 1.8 fighter attacks pressed to within 200 yards, 34% bomber losses per mission, 2 to 4 aircraft. The Germans notice. Luftwaffe pilot Hans Philipp, an ace with over 200 kills, writes in his diary after encountering the modified B-24s on October 14th. The American waste. Gunners have somehow increased their firepower. Attacks from beam positions now met with continuous fire that makes close passes suicidal. We are losing experienced pilots to sustained defensive barrages. On October 20th, during a mission to Durin, Staff Sergeant Donovan, still flying missions despite his celebrity, demonstrates the system's full potential. 6 FW-190s execute a coordinated beam attack on his aircraft. Standard doctrine, they'd normally break off after their initial pass when defensive fire became sporadic due to jams. Not this time. Donovan tracks the first fighter from 800 yards, opens fire at 600. He doesn't stop firing. The sustained stream of 50 caliber rounds forces the German to break early. Donovan pivots to the second fighter, still firing. Then the third. He fires 840 rounds in 90 seconds. More ammunition than most waste gunners expended in an entire mission under the old system. The result? 1 FW-190 confirmed destroyed, 2 damaged. More importantly, all 6 fighters break off their attack without closing to effective firing range. The bomber he's protecting, heaven can wait, makes it home without a scratch. By November 1943, the modification spreads throughout the 8th Air Force. Group armorers share the design. Wright Field officially approves it. Supply depots manufacture standardized roller guide kits. Consolidated Aircraft even incorporates the design into production B-24s, starting with the J-model variant. The impact on crew survival is measurable. During Big Week in February 1944, 6 days of maximum effort raids against German aircraft factories, B-24 losses run nearly 30% lower than predicted. Post-battle analysis credits improved defensive fire as a primary factor. Captain William Shaw, the Wright Field engineer who initially doubted Donovan, includes a paragraph in his classified technical report. Essajni Donovan's modification solved through practical observation what evaded systematic engineering analysis. By focusing on the fundamental problem, belt movement within the chute, rather than optimizing the chute itself, he identified a solution that was both simpler and more effective than any proposed by trained engineers. But perhaps the most powerful validation comes from the crews themselves. In December 1943, Staff Sergeant Anthony Kowalski, waist gunner, 308 9th Bomb Group, writes home to his parents in Milwaukee. "Ma, remember I told you about how scared I was of my gun jamming? I don't worry about that anymore. Some sergeant figured out how to make them work right. Yesterday, we got hit by fighters, and my gun didn't jam once. I think that sergeant saved my life." After the war, when researchers compiled data on defensive gunnery effectiveness, the statistics are stark. Period. June-September 1943, pre-modification. Waist gun malfunctions per mission. 2.7 average sustained fire capability, 180-220. RPM defensive kill ratio, 1 kill per 8,400 rounds fired. Bomber loss rate, 5.8% per mission. Period. October 1943, May 1944, post-modification. Waist gun malfunctions per mission, 0.4 average sustained fire capability, 620-680 RPM. Defensive kill ratio, 1 kill per 3,100 rounds fired. Bomber loss rate, 3.2% per mission. The numbers translate to lives. At the reduced loss rate, an estimated 2,100 additional airmen survived missions between October 1943 and war's end who would have died under pre-modification loss rates. Not all of them knew who to thank, but some did. In May 1945, after VE Day, a letter reaches Donovan, now Technical Sergeant Donovan, at his base in England. It's from Lieutenant Thomas McCarthy, pilot of a B-24 that made an emergency landing in Sweden after the October 14th Schweinfurt raid. Dear Sergeant Donovan, it reads, I don't know if you'll remember, but we were in the same briefing when Colonel Posey first announced your gun modification. I thought you were crazy. So did half the room. On October 14th, my waist gunners fired over 1,200 rounds straight during a fighter attack. Every round fed perfectly. When we crashed in Sweden, my entire crew walked away. Our waist gunners told me those guns are why we survived long enough to reach neutral territory. So I'm writing to say thank you. Because of you, I'm going home to meet my daughter, who was born while I was overseas. Because of you, 9 men on my crew got to see their families again. I don't know if they'll give you a medal for what you did. They should. You saved more lives than most combat heroes. Thank you. June 1945, Shipton Air Base, England. The war in Europe is over. The 44th Bomb Group is preparing to redeploy stateside. Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, now 23 years old, stands by his old bomber, watching ground crews strip it for parts. A jeep pulls up. Out steps General Curtis LeMay, commander of the WWII Bomber Command, recently returned from the Pacific. Sergeant Donovan? Yes, sir. Donovan snaps to attention. At ease. I'm here because the Air Force wants to put you in for a Legion of Merit for your ammunition feed modification. They want you to come to Washington, do publicity tours, talk to the press. Donovan shifts uncomfortably. Sir, I appreciate that, but I just fixed a gun. There are men who deserve medals. Pilots who brought home shot-up bombers. Gunners who stayed at their positions while wounded. I used some thread spools. LeMay studies him. You know how many men your thread spools saved? I've heard numbers, sir. I don't know if I believe them. Over 2,000 airmen. Conservative estimate. Your modification reduced bomber losses by 38% in the groups that implemented it. That's not just a fixed gun, Sergeant. That's a strategic impact. Sir, any mechanic could have, but they didn't. You did. That's what matters. Donovan doesn't know what to say to that. LeMay hands him a folder. Here's the thing, Sergeant. The Air Force wants to make you famous, but I'm guessing that's the last thing you want. I'd like to go home, sir, see my family, maybe get that high school diploma I never finished. LeMay smiles. Fair enough. The medal will be in your service record. If anyone ever asks, you can tell them, but you don't have to do the publicity circuit if you don't want to. Thank you, sir. After LeMay leaves, Donovan touches the cold metal of the bomber one last time. 4 years of war, 33 combat missions. He'd been terrified on every single one, but he'd done something that mattered. Michael Patrick Donovan returned to Detroit in July 1945. He married his high school sweetheart, Patricia, and used the GI Bill to open an auto repair shop on Woodward Avenue. He ran it for 43 years, retiring in 1988. He never spoke publicly about his modification. When customers learned he was a veteran, he'd talk about his crew, his buddies, the men who didn't make it home, but never about the roller guide system that saved thousands of lives. In military archives, the modification is officially designated AIM M2 Feed Enhancement Kit, Type D47. Aviation historians call it the Donovan Roller System. Most airmen just called it that fix that made the waist guns work. The principle behind Donovan's modification, reducing friction in flexible ammunition feeds through intermediary contact points, remains standard practice. Modern machine gun systems on helicopters, ground vehicles, and fixed installations use variations of the same concept. When engineers at Saco Defense tested next-generation 50 caliber systems in 1987, they noted in their technical documentation, feed reliability improvements trace lineage to WWII era field modifications. particularly roller guide systems developed under combat conditions. Michael Donovan died in 1994, age 71. His obituary in the Detroit Free Press mentioned he was a WWII veteran and owned Donovan's auto repair. It didn't mention that he'd changed air warfare. At his funeral, 3 elderly men in bomber jackets appeared, former B-24 gunners who'd served with the 44th. They'd tracked him down through veterans organizations. "We wanted to say thank you," one explained to Donovan's widow. "A lot of us wouldn't be here without what Mick did." Patricia showed them a cardboard box she'd found while going through Mick's belongings. Inside, a handful of wooden thread spools, a coil of steel wire, and a handwritten note dated September 18, 1943. The note read, "First prototype. Worked. Don't know why the engineers never thought of this. Guess sometimes you need a guy who fixes cars, not builds them." Sometimes genius isn't about having all the training or credentials. Sometimes it's about seeing a problem with fresh eyes, having the courage to try something crazy, and caring enough about your buddies to risk court-martial to keep them alive. Staff Sergeant Michael Patrick Donovan didn't have an engineering degree from MIT. He had grease under his fingernails, common sense from Detroit's machine shops, and the simple conviction that if something doesn't work, you fix it with whatever you've got. And sometimes that's worth more than all the advanced degrees in the world. Staff Sergeant Michael P. Donovan, 1922-1994, 44th Bombardment Group, Flying 8 Balls, 33 combat missions, Legion of Merit, declined public recognition. His modification reduced B-24 defensive gun malfunctions by 85%. Estimated 2,100-plus airmen survived missions who would have been lost. Still studied in modern ammunition feed system design. "I just wanted the damn gun to work." M. Donovan, 1987 interview.